the managing director of the Draper funds, and they do a lot of investments, obviously in the early stage companies. So Andy also is the CEO of Hero City and at Draper University, and I think before that you spent a lot of time in different investment organizations, and I think before that I was looking, trying to find some information. I saw that you also worked at Intel early on, so I think you spent a lot of times in technology and in investments. And I think, so for this session, really our title is Building Enterprise Blockchain Communities. But before we get there, what I wanted to, since I'm moderating it, I get to ask personal questions. So what? I wanted to start off with a few questions and then get into the blockchain communities. So personally, I'm an investor in Bitcoin. I don't know how many of you guys invest in Bitcoin, but I've been an early investor and I invested in it since 2014. And recently, so last 2 days were
sitting on a lot of capital gains, Tang.
were exceptionally volatile. And I wanted to ask Andy, what do you think about the recent price movements in Bitcoin and Ethereum and maybe some other major currencies? And do you have any sort of insight what's going on in the markets right now, and maybe what would be your prediction for the price, 6 months and then 2 years down the road?
Yeah, so I would just first say that, as a venture capitalist, I always take sort of solve the problems I can solve. And the problem I can solve is I can make 10-year predictions, but I'm terrible at making 1 year or even 2-year predictions. But my partner Tim had a public prediction out. What is that? 250K by 2022. I'm not sure where that number came from. Every time I ask him, he said it's a proprietary, approach. And I was like, okay. I did do math one time. I took the total value of gold around the world divided by 22 million, and I think the number came out to be, I forget, is it $500,000 or 400K or something like that. So that's definitely sort of one brute force approach, but I don't hang my hat on that. I look at a 20-year horizon. I look at a 20-year horizon. Any one of these blockchain-based tokens could probably be valued pretty high because I think they're an important part of this, what I call the internet square revolution. A lot of these new applications will evolve, and then if you're the fundamental building block, the packets, the tokens that people use on a day-to-day basis, there's value, right? I think it's very difficult to make a short-term prediction, but long-term prediction, we are very bullish in the, if you take a 10-year view, as Draper Funds, as you mentioned, we're very active. We have made 30 investments in equity or tokens in blockchain companies. Not done out of here, but out of our digital asset, Draper Dragon digital asset funds in Cayman. So very bullish, long term.
Thank you very much. And I like your actually sort of value calculation on Bitcoin, and I'm on the same page. I think Bitcoin can take a fair share market of gold market, and I think that's a good way of actually calculating a value of Bitcoin. And now that you mentioned different other cryptocurrencies, the next question I wanted to ask you was about the ICOs. I know we, at F50, for example, we spend a lot of time thinking about the ICOs, and we spend a lot of time looking at different blockchain companies, and this coming event, Founder World, is all about the new startups that are going to revolutionize the blockchain and be the next big thing. However, recently we've seen a slowdown in ICOs as well, and so I wanted to see, Andy, what you think in terms about ICOs and what the future is, and maybe the biggest challenges right now.
Yeah, I think the slowdown is relative to last year's huge run-up. So if you look at the token generation event, TGE market, compared to years ago, it's still a pretty high growth. And fundamentally, it's a pretty efficient way for startups to issue, this product, right? And this product happened to have some value. So I think it will keep going. And then now people talk about securities tokens where you could actually revolutionize, asset management, asset-backed tokens. So I think it's pretty interesting. I think we're barely scratching the surface of what blockchain can do. But at the same time, I always tell people, it's difficult to assess where we are. Is this 1999 or is this 1997? Is it a couple years of bull market in the token space, or are we crashing? Not sure. But one thing for sure is, if you take a 10-year view, it's going to be very interesting. It just always goes back to 10-year view. Does this have value? I think it's a lot of value. It makes fundraising easier. It makes value stakeholder tracking. I won't say shareholder because you're not a shareholder. Stakeholder tracking very easy and cheap. It's a good thing. So it will stay. In what form? Not sure.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, sort of building on that question, I think in the past, a lot of ICOs, the business model has been to sort of issue the tokens and then attract the investors, and then investors kind of turn around and sell the tokens very quickly, even a lot of times without having an actual product being built. And a lot of times those ICOs, they sort of focus on really big things and sort of they try to appeal to a broad customer base. And one idea that we're having and sort of keep thinking about it is what's next for those ICOs? What are the next wave of ideas in the ICOs are going to come from? And we're turning a little bit towards thinking like, could it be that the enterprise is going to be the next sort of customer for the ICOs and for the blockchain startups? Could we begin developing some solutions for the enterprise that the enterprise may be interested in? And maybe you can share some comments on that.
Yeah, so I know this is a conference. Enterprise is one of the topics, so I'll sort of present the pros and the cons of enterprise market. Historically, so you've blockchain aside, enterprise market, historically to venture-backed companies, the pro is that it's pretty stable. It's cash flow. It's difficult to get in, and once you get in, it's hard for you to get displaced. It's a very deterministic way to create value, right? If you have good technology, eventually you win. You have to be patient. You have to sort of have enough capital to support you. The con is that historically, enterprise customers don't like startups, right? There is a decision maker somewhere sitting in the room thinking, do I try to take a risk on the startup or do I buy IBM? Well, I'm going to buy IBM because I don't want to get fired if the startup doesn't work. So that's going to be a challenge. It's a generic challenge for enterprise companies, regardless of blockchain or not. So I think we're going to see that. The question is enterprise ready for blockchain? And I'm not sure. So far, you actually see quite a few enterprises jumped in. Part of it is because blockchain is a little bit sexy. People want to talk about it, and some enterprise wanted to be associated with it. It's give them a nicer stock market valuation multiple. Again, if you take a 10-year view, the questions I would ask would be very different. Do enterprises need blockchain? And if they do, how would they use it? If it's purely within enterprise, it will become really interesting. Why not use just a database? Why do you need to use blockchain? I don't know. Now, let's ask another question. If you look at the large venture-backed companies where they create value in the last 20, 30 years, what do you notice? Most of these are consumer related, right? Yes, you could cite examples of Cisco, Juniper, but they are small. I mean, they were small compared to Uber, Airbnb, Apple, right, or Google. But they were large once upon a time during deployment of infrastructure, right? So it's really interesting as you think through what kind of companies is back at what stage of the economic or technology adoption, right? So if you then sort of come back to the blockchain land, perhaps one of the first thing that takes off is consumer-facing applications. Perhaps it involves enterprise, some sort of B2C or even C2C. But what I'm thinking is without the C part, B2B, you really have to do some digging to figure out why this is better than the database. But a B2C part, then you have to figure out why would the C want it. And my argument is most of these C companies we have on the traditional internet is pretty good. It's going to be pretty hard pressed for me to find a decentralized social media site that has richer features or more friends than on Facebook. Then the question is, why would they want to switch from Facebook to this decentralized site, right? There are many reasons you could think about, right? And I think maybe one of the reasons is it's a brand. It's a brand for trust, right? Somehow, not me, but perhaps the next generation of millennials or I don't even know, the Gen Y, they think about these big companies not to be trusted, just like when we thought about IBM is not, you want to do something different. Otherwise, there's no really, I don't see a technical reason or even a feature business reason to switch. Just one thought.
Thank you. That was actually very insightful and very interesting that you mentioned that B2B type of companies, they kind of tend to be smaller compared to B2C, and I cannot agree more with you on that. And perhaps that's just the sheer market value. There's more customers than businesses out there. So from your
but I would say though, B2B, once upon a time during deployment, they were very large, right? We all made our money in optical communication, CommIC, Juniper, Cisco. There was a time for that. So maybe there's infrastructure building for blockchain. That's possible.
Right,
yeah.
but there is sort of a lower limit of size
there's
for the
a
B2B.
ceiling. There's a ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you were to kind of look in the market, what would be the most interesting areas for this enterprise application for blockchain right now?
So we have invested in about 30 blockchain companies last 12 months. We essentially can't predict which sector is going to take off, right? And that's why we have built a portfolio. And very honestly, because if I knew, I'd be lying. If anybody knew, anybody would be lying, because no one can predict consumer and customer behavior until it happens. But I do think certain areas where it involves a large company and their customers, consumers, some sort of trust-based data that's immutable, okay? I think there is some interesting applications, right? So we're an investor in a company called VChain, right? They basically help, car manufacturers or food manufacturers develop this external database, if you could think about it, that they put out. When you caught the fish, when was the fish, frozen and sent to the supermarket supply chain, you could get all of that online. You could just look it up, and no one could tamper with the data. Then you trust that data, right? Or BMW, where the parts came from, where the body shop, the engine, the steel mill. You could track the whole supply chain inventory, and I think that seems like an interesting application that I could be convinced there's a shot, but they still have a lot of work to do, just like any startup, right? The adoption, you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think, again, I find that I agree on basically everything you say. I think we ourselves, we see supply chain and logistics as one field where I think blockchain, where I could also see blockchain potentially being used, and also identity management. How do you create a digital passport which you can share with everybody, share with people you want to share. So yeah, those are, I think, are very interesting themes for blockchain and for the companies to build around. And I think
it involves a lot of end users, right? In this case.
Right. And it actually takes the advantage of the blockchain. Like you mentioned this before. What's blockchain can be just another data, or it is sort of another database, right? And the only difference is that it can be distributed database and it can be a trustless database, so you don't have a certain authority. And what is the application out there that can take advantage of that? And one is identity management, perhaps another one is supply management, although that one must be a little bit more limited because again, it's like a lot of B2B stuff.
It's sort of the back end, but you could see the adoption in the front end, and you start driving the standard, and that upstream suppliers will have to conform to that standard.
Yeah, and this reminds me, just recently, a few months ago, there was a hearing actually in the Senate, and they had the big logistical companies presenting the case for the blockchain. And as I kind of dug deeper, I realized that a lot of problems happens at the customs level. So people still operate with pen and paper, and a lot of delay happens just because there is no signed paperwork in place, and they wait for two weeks to get that paperwork in place. So yes, I think supply chain management is
another thing I thought I'd share with you is that oftentimes people think about blockchain, they think, well, the native application is going to be something related to payment, right? Because you think about, oh, it's payment, the concept of valuable token is built in. But again, if you go back to the big venture-backed companies from the internet days, what became successful, typically there are unregulated industries, right? Unregulated. Unfortunately, payment companies or payment technologies, regardless is, it's the less free countries like China to the very free country like the US, highly regulated, right? Payment transmission license, exchange license. There are a lot of things logically you think you should be able to do. If I got some euros, you got some dollars, we should be able to just change it. No, it's illegal. So if that's illegal, you can't really exchange Bitcoin, Ethereum, or maybe as a commodity. It's not, it's a currency. So it gets a little bit hairy, right? So if you think about, again, what happened in the internet may not happen to blockchain, but it's an interesting proxy. It's a pretty complicated system that we live in, and if you're trying to make a sort of a single variable prediction, whether it goes viral or not, there are many things out of your control. And regulation is one of those things people often overlook.
Definitely. And we see that the regulation, for sure, for all the ICOs is on the rise. And I think it's a good thing. Yeah. Okay, so my last question is going to be about building communities. So we know that this particular event has to do with communities and how you build the communities. And now that we're switching to kind of the conversation to the enterprise level, maybe how do you build an enterprise blockchain community? And maybe at the university you guys have experience with that, so maybe you can share some of the thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually just noticed it's harder to build a community in a depressed token price market, but the communities you build will last longer. Make sense? Right. So this happened again in the internet. I keep referring back to the internet era because the sort of the network we built during the 97, 99, they're very large. Everyone has an internet business. And then to a point where no one wants to be in the internet business, but those who remain turn out to be the most interesting contact you have for, tens of years to come. So I actually think it's a self-filtering process. There is no secret about building the enterprise community versus other communities. I think the key is to be persistent and not let the short-term environment discourage your long-term vision. I always tell people when things are really, really vibrant, don't get too excited, it'll come down. When things are really, really depressed, don't be too sad because it'll come up, right? If you can keep that in mind, it'll help you with how to navigate the 10-year horizon.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think when things get excited, and a lot of times, what excites people? Well, the money. You know, when things go up, when the price goes up, people get very excited, and that attracts a lot of speculators into the field. And now, when the prices go down, then all those speculators they get out, and only the core people who are really passionate about the technology, who really understand the technology, those are the people who stay and start the next wave.
Yeah,
well,
came for the money and stay for the technology.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's thank Andy for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.